Hello there and welcome to the MTG Degree pre-release guide, where we always kick ass and chew bubblegum. But as always, we're all out of gum.
I go where I please, and I please where I go.
Now we're going to do the pre-release guide today on the commons and uncommons, because that's what you're going to see the most of, and so that'll be the most useful thing for you to look over. The rares, I expect you to be able to figure out, but maybe I'll make a video on those too. Anyway, let's start off with the lands, because those usually tell us what's going on. Now what we start right away noticing is that the commons and uncommons in the land slot don't really have any multicolor stuff going on too much. That kind of signals that you're going to want to be in one or two colors, probably two, let's be realistic. Now the lands that I recommend you play are the 5 common cycle lands that are a single color. Those are actually really good. They come into play tapped, you can kind of sneak them in during your plays, but if you draw them late and you're all flooded out, you don't need any more land, boom, you got that cycling going on, and that's what you want them for. Next up, we've got all of the spell lands except for blue. That's because the blue one is garbage. You're going to want to run these ones, and they hurt you for 1 damage. I know that is just the worst thing ever, but they give you something to do in the late game, and honestly, that is a really nice thing to have in your lands. Also, they're deserts, which come into play on some of the cards, so, you know, added random synergy. I'd like to start off, as we always do, with white, and for the creature spells, I'd like to start off with Steward of Solidarity, Oketra's Avenger, and Solitary Camel. Now, Steward of Solidarity is great, because it's just a 2/2 for 2, nothing too amazing, but as the game goes on, you can use it to make these annoying 1/1s. If you've seen those kind of abilities before, they're very annoying to deal with, so I like being the annoying person that's using them. Oketra's Avenger is one of those 3/1s for 2, which are almost always less impressive than you think they are because they just don't end up getting in there for damage. But Oketra's Avenger will get in there for damage, or at least attack and cause them to block, so I like Oketra's Avenger. Solitary Camel is, you know, just one of those classic camels in Magic that we see all the time. But seriously, if you have 4 or more deserts, this thing's going to have a lot of lifelink pretty often, and a 3/2 lifelink for 3, that's a deal. Next up, we've got Dauntless Haven, Sunscourge Champion, and Vizier of the True. Now, Dauntless Haven is great because it's got that evasion, as always. These flying creatures, gotta love them. And it helps out those exert creatures not have to stay tapped for a turn, which is beautiful. Next, we've got Sunscourge Champion, and this card is nice because if you're trying to play the long game at all, if you're not trying to get in there and beat face, man, it is great. Over the course of its use, it'll gain you 6 life. That's pretty darn nice. 2 bodies and 1 card. I like it. Vizier of the True is for those aggressive decks, though, along with like Dauntless Haven, you know, these two could work together. And Vizier of the True is just going to get you in there, which is nice. Next up, we've got Sandblast and Desert's Hold. Sandblast, when you can stop something that has 5 toughness, that's when it really does everything. And that's what I like about Sunblast. Desert's Hold, if you got one of those deserts, it's of course amazing, but even if not, it stops it from attacking, blocking, and no abilities, which is really great because there's a lot of tricky creatures that have them. Last card is Unconventional Tactics. Now, this is of course the best in a white-black zombies deck, but there's enough zombies randomly in decks that this is going to come back to you, which is awesome. I imagine that I'm going to die to Unconventional Tactics quite a bit over the course of the next few months, and I imagine that I will kill people with it quite a bit too. Next up, we've got blue with Aerial Guide, Spellweaver Eternal, and Eternal of Hearthtruths. Now, Aerial Guide is wonderful because it just jumps your creatures constantly. That's a very powerful ability to not have to spend anything on. And here are 2 creatures that would love to be jumped. Spellweaver Eternal, which hits very hard if it's just getting in there, and Eternal of Hearthtruths, which is going to draw you those sweet cards. Next up, we've got Sinuous Striker, Ominous Sphinx, and Vizier of the Anointed. Now, Sinuous Striker is going to be kind of mediocre on the first run around, but on the second run around, it's a 4/4 that gets to change up its stats. That's very nice, and its anointed cost is not too ridiculous. Ominous Sphinx is just a 4/4 flyer for 5. That is a very fair value, so ignoring all the text on it, gotta like it. Vizier of the Anointed is actually pretty great. I love these cards that give you value. So you're just going to play it, it's going to dump a card in the graveyard for you, and then you're going to be able to use that card later. So for example, there's that cat with a sword on its tail. yeah, this is something you'd grab with that. In the non-creatures, we've got Supreme Will and Imaginary Threats. Now, Supreme Will's great because it's got the dual mode. So there's no way that you're going to have a problem with this. Even if your opponent is flooding, you're just going to be able to use the other mode. Fantastic. Imaginary Threats. This is actually a very strong thing because it's one of those cards that's very strong situationally. If you've got a bit of a board that can trade very well with their board, that's something you want them to attack into you. That way you can just kill other creatures. But if it's not that kind of game, no problem, just cycle it away. Next up, we've got Unquenchable Thirst, Unsummon, and Strategic Planning. Of course, Unquenchable Thirst is one of those removal spells that's great, but it's pretty much at a premium when you've got 4+ deserts in your deck. That's when you can really kind of expect it to work as you want it to. Unsummon, very strong card, surprisingly strong. If there's a combat that's not going your way because they're using a surprise trick in the middle of combat, boom, unsummon, you can save your guy, you can bounce their guy. This is a very strong thing to do for 1 blue, and it kills creature tokens like the 4/4s that are coming back from people's graveyards on the spot. Strategic Planning is really fun because you can dump those things in your graveyard that you're going to reanimate and make tokens out of later, and you can find something that you need. Next up is black, and starting with the creatures, we've got Accursed Horde, Scrounger of Souls, and Ruin Rat. Accursed Horde is actually fun because it's a zombie where you can make other zombies indestructible, but it doesn't say that you can't make itself indestructible, so you don't need any other zombies in order to make this card useful, which is very nice in my opinion. Now, Scrounger of Souls, it looks like a very simple card, but it's going to slow down your opponent a lot if you're trying to get to that late game. Lifelink really swings battles. Very annoying. Last up, we've got Ruin Rat. These 1/1 rats with Death Touch can never be underestimated. But the nice thing about this one is it gets that value when it dies, which I really appreciate because let's say that it trades off with another creature that has an ability to come back from a graveyard. Boom, it just takes that creature, it's gone. Next up, we've got Merciless Eternal and Bane Whip Punisher. Now, Merciless Eternal, of course, you can, dump cards later on in the game that you're just not finding very useful and get a lot of value with Merciless Eternal. Bane Whip Punisher, I really like because it allows you to put that -1/-1 counter. That might just kill something on its own. And then even if not, you can do stuff when you're behind, such as put a -1/-1 counter on something, block another creature, and then sacrifice, and you haven't taken damage from 2 creatures and killed 1 with your 1 creature. That's a very fancy little play that Bane Whip Punisher lets you do. For non-creature spells, we've got Torment of Venom and Lethal Sting. Now, Torment of Venom is kind of nice because it allows your opponent to make mistakes with how they choose. They should probably just lose a 3 life every time, but, you might get some random creatures off the side of this. Lethal Sting looks like it hurts pretty bad. Putting -1/-1 counters on your creatures is not fun, especially if you don't have something like Decimator Beetle sitting around. Now, Lethal Sting, though, still will kill anything, which is very important. Your opponent's going to play crazy huge creatures at times, and Lethal Sting will kill them. Next up is the kind of card that I love is Torment of Scarabs. Now, basically, you play this thing, and then you try to drag out the game as long as possible, and you're pretty much guaranteed to win, assuming infinite time. And that's kind of my type of game. Just slowly, you suck the hope out of them, and that's something that I appreciate. Next up is red creatures, starting with Frontline Devastator, Kenra Scrapper, and Burning Fist Minotaur. Now, these are kind of beat-em-up creatures. I really want to point out Burning Fist Minotaur, though. This one is really fantastic. A first strike creature that can pump up its own power is always very strong, so I like that one a lot. Next up, we've got Fervent Paincaster, Sand Strangler, and Manticore Eternal. Now, Fervent Paincaster, there are a lot of creatures, and I'm saying a lot in this set that have 1 toughness. So Fervent Paincaster can actually tap to kill a creature with its Exert ability, which is wonderful. If you've got a board stall, you can always get in those little pings of damage, which is great. Sand Strangler, really love when you've got, again, one of those 4+ desert decks, because it comes down and it just kills a creature. That's something that we see in Magic every once in a while, and it's always strong. This one, you have to have the desert, but if you have a decent amount of deserts, Sand Strangler is going to get you that value. Manticore Eternal, I actually love a lot. Usually, these cards that are forced to attack are pretty much garbage, but this one gets to damage them when it attacks, and it's a big chunky creature. So it's not like they're not going to give you something when they're blocking. You're really going to take out a chunk of them, chunk of their life, chunk of their creatures. I like it. In non-creature spells, we've got Kindled Fury, Abrade, and Open Fire. Kindled Fury is just one of those 1-mana combat tricks that people just don't see coming, especially at pre-releases. You're going to get them with this. Abrade and Open Fire are just simple burn spells for creatures and face. They're always good, so you always play them. Next up is green, and starting off with the creatures, we got Ronus' Stalwart, Devotee of Strength, and Bitterbow Sharpshooters. Now, Ronus' Stalwart I like because it reminds me a lot of Gustwalker, which I knew was busted when I first looked at that last time. Now, this is not as great as Gustwalker, but Gustwalker was absurd, so this is still pretty good in my opinion. Devotee of Strength, I love things where you can pump in mana and get out great abilities. This is one of those great abilities, and it can just target anything, which is great. Bitterbow Sharpshooters, you know, it doesn't look fancy, but sometimes fancy is not needed. Green has some hard time with the flyers, and this stops most flyers in the air. Next up, we've got Feral Prowler and Sifterworm. Now, Feral Prowler looks like not that impressive. What you have to realize with this card is, this is the kind of card where you are not attacking. Your goal is to get attacked, and then in the late game, play the really big thing. So this is just slowing them down. Sifterworm is basically a payoff that helps you find more payoffs. It is a 7/7 for 7, which is quite large when other people are reanimating 4/4s. This really stands out from the pack, you know what I mean. And with the Scry 3, even without the other clauses, just the Scry 3 is great. You don't have to use it to just find random stuff with big converted mana costs. It can find you very specific things. So I like Sifterworm if you can get there. You have to make sure that you can actually get to 7 mana. Next, in green non-creature spells, we've got Overcome, Gift of Strength, and Ambuscade, with Ambuscade being a big deal. This card is fantastic. If you've got like 3 Ambuscades or something like that, you really need to take a hard, long look at green. Next up are gold cards, and gold cards always tend to be good for their rarity, and that's true here today. So we're going to start off with Bloodwater Entity, Obelisk Spider, Resolute Survivors, River Hopo, and Unraveling Mummy. Now, these all look pretty standard. I'm going to point out River Hopo because you may or may not play this, and you may not want to play this, but I am personally going to play the heck out of this card because I love this tiny bird, and I want it to peck my enemies to death. Of the gold split cards, I like Farm to Market, Struggle to Survive, and Appeal to Authority. The other two don't impress me that much. Going on to artifacts, there's Crook of Condemnation, Manolith, and Traveler's Amulet. Now, Manolith and Traveler's Amulet are for people who just can't stop themselves from going 3 colors. These are going to help you do that. Crook of Condemnation is there for the people who are bringing back stuff from their graveyard all the time. This will really allow you to have the massive amount of interaction in your sideboard games that you would like. Don't mainboard this, sideboard this, definitely if you see the need. With all that being said, I'm glad that you joined me here at MTG Degree. Hit that like button if you liked it. Hit that dislike button if you disliked it. Just be engaged. You can hit a comment, subscribe, do all that jazz, and I'll see you on our next video.